Hello and welcome to Sophy on Sunday. Finally, the moment is almost here. In 2 days' time, MPs will vote on the Prime Minister's Brexit deal, and after 2 painful years of negotiating, it looks like the plan will be emphatically rejected. But such are the extraordinary political times we live in. It's the size of the defeat and not its very existence that really matters. Will Theresa May come back with a plan B? Will the Labour Party table a confidence motion in the government? In the next hour, we'll try and find out with the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, the Shadow Business Secretary, Rebecca Long-Bailey, and 3 influential backbench MPs who could prove decisive. But first, Theresa May faces the biggest parliamentary vote of her premiership so far, and let's be honest, things aren't looking too good. She's already lost 2 votes this week, including one which forces the government to set out its plans within 3 days if the meaningful vote is lost. And someone who's known her for longer than most, and in fact ran her leadership campaign, is the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, who joins us now. Thank you very much for being with us. Not long until this crucial vote. It looks as if Theresa May will lose it. So what's plan B?
Well, let's cross that bridge when and if it happens. Right now, her focus, my focus, the government's focus is on convincing people that actually this is the best thing to do. It's the right option. It's the most likely to deliver Brexit. And we want to convince colleagues that it's the right thing to do to back it.
I understand that you want to focus on the vote ahead, but people are quite worried. I mean, I spent the week in Harlow, for example, where people are really concerned about what happens next if the deal falters. So let's make a deal. You don't have to tell me what plan B is, but you have got one, right? Well,
look, the important thing right now is to convince people otherwise. I mean, I'm not going to get into, will we do this, will we do that, will we do the other? The important thing is to say to fellow MPs, those concerns are out there, and there's big concerns. Are we going to leave? Are we going to deliver Brexit? Are we going to somehow try and reverse Brexit? Is Parliament going to force us to reverse Brexit? What we have is, I think, a sensible compromise deal. It's not giving everybody everything they want, but it was never going to. This was a 52-48 result.
Have you got everything you want?
Of course not. And indeed, I think most people, the Prime Minister herself has said, this is not the perfect deal. But if you'd offered me this deal back in 2016, at the time of the referendum, and you said, instead of staying in the European Union, you can have this, I'd have said, thank you very much.
At the same time, though, I understand you don't want to get into the details, but if you don't say what your plan B is, or at least give the implication that you have a plan B, then other people will step into that gap. And the Sunday papers are absolutely full of MPs from different parties coming up with their own plan Bs, stepping into the void that's been left by your government.
Well, I don't think it is a void at all. The government's coming forward with a proposal to the nation, a proposal to Parliament that says this is what we think is the best compromise deal that enables us to leave as good friends, good neighbours, on good terms with the European Union, carry on trading with the European Union, and at the same time get the benefits of Brexit, being able to forge our own trade policies, to leave the single market legislation, to leave the customs union, to leave the common agricultural policy, to leave the common fisheries policy. What we campaigned for in 2016 was not to become an inward-focused nation, not to walk away from international friendships, but was to stay good friends and neighbours, to be a globally focused country, but actually take back control of our laws and our finances. And I think that this deal achieves that, but it does so in a way that recognises the fact the nation is pretty divided on this issue.
I mean, more than half of MPs have publicly said that they are not going to be backing the deal, so the prospect of no deal becomes very real. You, of course, have been very involved in some of that no-deal planning as Transport Secretary, and just want to really talk for a while about how that no-deal planning is going. Because, for example, you've employed a company called Seaborne Freight to provide some extra ferry routes. It's now emerged that they don't have any ships, and actually they won't be ready until a month after we've left. I mean, that's not going to inspire confidence in people, is it?
Well, what I've done is I've hired 2 very well-established ferry companies, DFDS and Brittany Ferries, to supply an element of extra capacity across the Channel in a no-deal scenario. First and foremost, our goal and my prime priority in a no-deal scenario is to keep the conventional routes through Dover and Calais and through the Channel Tunnel moving smoothly. I've had conversations with my French counterpart, we've had political discussions with the French, we've had official discussions with the French, and everyone is committed to keeping things flowing as smoothly as possible.
Yeah, but if
the additional capacity,
that doesn't mean that it will be.
But that's why we're putting in place some extra capacity to take some of the pressure off the
of confidence is the traffic jam that was organised, in which 150 lorries were hoped to turn up and actually only 89.
Get late work to do, you invite in more than you need to get the job done, and that's what we did.
Have you been in touch with the Ministry of Defence about some of your no-deal planning?
I've talked to Gavin Williamson about no-deal planning quite regularly, yes.
What about?
Well, when we discuss as cabinet colleagues what we would do in no-deal planning terms. I mean, I don't have the military actively involved in no-deal planning beyond the secondment of a small number of staff from the Ministry of Defence, as is happening across Whitehall. I mean, our focus in no-deal planning has been to make sure we have all the aviation agreements we need in place, making sure that we take into account the possibility of disruption in Kent. I do not want a repeat of what happened in 2015 when the whole of Kent was ground to a halt by troubles in the Channel ports, making sure that we have some alternative capacity in place if it's needed. But first and foremost, working with the French, working with people at Eurotunnel, working with people at Dover and Calais to make sure that we keep the trade flowing smoothly. Everybody wants that to happen.
But the army is on standby. The military is ready to help if it looks like there will be major disruption.
Well, no, I have not asked for military support for the operations in Kent. That will be handled by Highways England and by Kent Police.
OK. Now, yesterday you said that the far right could benefit if Brexit isn't pushed through. And I just want to have a little look at some of those comments that you did make, because you said that if MPs don't back Theresa May's deal, we risk a break with the British tradition of moderate mainstream politics that goes back to the Restoration in 1660. What did you mean?
Well, I think you're putting into quotes things I didn't actually say as a quote, but what I actually meant was that if we do
Well, that was a quote in the Mail. Were you misquoted then?
No, I think that was a quote outside question marks. I don't recall mentioning the Restoration. What I said is we will lose a tradition.
My understanding is that was in quotation marks.
But, OK, let me explain. My concern is that we will have, in the aftermath of a decision not to go ahead with Brexit, if we do not fulfil the terms of that referendum, what we will have is the arrival in this country of the kind of populist politics on the extremes that we're seeing in most other European countries. We have always in this country, and this is where the point is absolutely right, we have always had, I think, a sensible political mainstream that has dealt with issues in a mature way throughout the decades. But what we haven't seen in this country is the appearance of political extremism in the way that we have seen in some other countries over the years. I do not want that, the emergence of the populist parties that we're seeing in most other European countries now, in this country, because we've turned around to the people, to the 17.4 million people who voted to leave, and simply said to them, well, guys, sorry, we're not leaving after all.
So just to be clear, because in the Mail on Sunday, on the Mail interview, they were saying that you're talking about the breaking with the tradition of politics that goes back to the Restoration in 1660. And I think what some people are thinking is, hang on, there's been a lot of pretty bad things that have happened since 1660. Wars, executions, millions of people not being able to vote at all. They were the good old days?
No, I did not specifically mention the date 1660. What I said is that I'm concerned that we will see now the kind of populist politics in this country that we have previously seen emerge in other European countries, and I do not want that to happen.
OK. Now, I just want to talk about your own record, because you've been Transport Secretary now for 2.5 years. Train punctuality is at a 13-year low, but fares keep rising. More than 3,000 bus routes reduced or scrapped since 2010. Is it a record that you're proud of, and do you think things are better now?
Well, I think what we're dealing with on the railways is continually expanded demand for services. Our rail network is absolutely full. We are putting a huge amount of money into the rail network, £47 billion over the next 5 years, opening new services around the country, starting new routes, replacing old trains with new ones. Every single train in the north of England is being replaced with a brand new or a completely refurbished train over the coming months. We've got new express trains on the East Coast Main Line, on the Great Western Main Line, on the Transpennine route coming later this year. A huge amount of investment taking place around the country. Some of that investment has been delayed, frustratingly. So what happened with Northern Rail last summer, because of the delay to the electrification of the line from Blackpool to Manchester, that was an investment programme that we were putting in, the government funding, which was delayed and caused knock-on effects to the timetable. But the reason we are spending this money is because we recognise that the rail system is hugely congested, and what we're trying to do is to ease the pressure, increase capacity, give people a better travelling experience.
I can't help but thinking that if you are one of these rail passengers, you know, we've been to Wigan with the show, for example, and spoken to some of these people who've been, you know, their lives really put under great strain because of the delays, not being able to get back to put their kids to bed, struggling to get to interviews and to jobs because they just can't rely on the transport system. And the answer is just not going to be good enough, is it?
Well, no, so of course it's not good enough. I mean, this is why we're replacing all the trains for those people with brand new trains with more seats, with more capacity. And the frustration last summer was the problems were caused by an electrification project that went wrong, that was delayed. This was government investment that was delayed. It wasn't government not putting in money, it was government investing money and a delay to the project, which meant there was a knock-on effect. The electric trains couldn't be used, and therefore there was a shortage of rolling stock. It was hugely frustrating. It's why we made sure that passengers will receive compensation for what happened. The service is now running better. It's not perfect, there's a way to go yet, but the service is running better and more reliably now, but it's not nearly good enough yet. And that's why I think the new trains coming across the north over the next few months will make a real difference.
We didn't mention bus routes there, which I did in my original question. And I can't help but thinking, again, bus routes are something that people don't give enough attention to in Westminster, and yet, you know, disproportionately people on lower incomes tend to use buses, people outside of the southeast. I mean, do you use the bus?
I do. Occasionally I use the train most days. I catch the train most days. I only use the bus from time to time. But this is one reason why we've given franchising powers back to mayoral authorities in recognition that it may be necessary for them to plan a significantly integrated network, better services, and actually in places where local authorities are really working with the private operators to deliver better services, like Cornwall, for example, you're seeing a rise in ridership, you're seeing a rise in revenues and a better service for passengers. So it can be done.
I just want to talk about drones as well before we leave, because I have to say it's been pretty embarrassing, hasn't it? And two of our major airports temporarily shut down because of drones, and there's been a lot of questions about why this wasn't recognised sooner as an issue.
Well, a simple answer is that in the case of Gatwick, what happened there was a unique situation that's not happened anywhere else in the world. Heathrow was different. Heathrow was a drone that appeared and disappeared.
A unique situation that some people were predicting.
Gatwick was a deliberate disruptive attack. The systems do not exist to completely tackle a problem like this. We were able to bring in some military equipment that helped ease the situation. Gatwick is now looking to put together a new set of systems that can tackle the problem. But we've had airports from all around the world come to us since this happened and said, we're not sure how we would cope. How did you cope? This is a new area. The technology is very immature. There's a lot of effort now going into this from airports around the UK. We're working with them to try and find the right solutions. But there wasn't a simple off-the-shelf solution that should have been in place that wasn't in place.
It feels as if you've been sort of trailed, shall we say, with misfortune in the Department of Transport with the drones. Before that, in the Ministry of Justice, with very controversial cuts to legal aid, with issues with the probation service. Why do you think it is that this kind of misfortune seems to follow you? Well,
it's a challenging time for all of us in government. We have to deliver change. We have to tackle new issues, like the drones, for example. So it's a question of getting on with the job and tackling the problems as best you can. But at the end of the day, dealing with your financial positions and also dealing with particular challenges like the expanding demand on the railways, you just got to get on with the job and do your best.
OK, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, after the break, I mentioned it in that interview. Find out what happened when I did visit Harlow in Essex to gauge the enthusiasm for the Prime Minister's Brexit deal.
The Duchess was on hand to help Patsy dress for a job interview. Rather fitting on the day that Meghan was starting a new phase in her own royal work.
Exactly. Or like the things they say, I don't know, I just, you know, I'm so busy and I multitask all the time. Maybe they say, well, say that. It's a great thing for your employer to know.
SmartWorks, a group that helps women back into employment, is one of the 4 charities to now have her as their patron.
When she came in and we were working on one particular candidate, she was very open and she said that she was about to take on a new role herself, and that when she felt overwhelmed, it was all about breathing and just remaining calm and just having confidence within.
In a nod to her acting career and a sign of support from the Queen, Meghan will take over from Her Majesty as patron of the National Theatre and the Association of Commonwealth Universities. But there is another passion she shares with the Queen. The animal welfare charity Mayhew is also getting her backing. We already knew a lot about what mattered to Meghan before she married Harry. Her public posts on gender and racial equality meant some described her as a game changer. So do her new roles live up to expectations?
I think she's been very outspoken around racial inequality in the past, particularly, and of course gender equality. And I think it would have been wonderful to have a royal speaking on these issues and campaigning on these issues. But I do think that we mustn't forget, you know, they're going to be married a long time. There's plenty of time to do many things, and I think that's something we'll see her do perhaps maybe a couple of years from now.
A big day for her new charities, but a growing baby bump shows she'll soon be taking on another new role, with her first child due in just a matter of months. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News.
Welcome back. Now, if the Prime Minister loses Tuesday's vote on her Brexit plan, what next? Because if she's got a plan B, she certainly hasn't told anyone about it. And that's encouraged MPs to come up with their own, including the Conservative Robert Halfon. Here's what happened when I went to his constituency in Harlow, Essex. If you want to find out the mood among original Leave voters, you could do worse than come to Harlow in Essex. 68% of people here voted to leave. In fact, every district in Essex voted out. Working class but aspirational, people first arrived in this new town from the bombed-out streets of East London after the Second World War. It's the natural home of Mann. Electorally, what happens in Harlow doesn't just stay in Harlow. History shows that whichever party wins here secures the keys to number 10. Would you like them to back Theresa May or not?
I think mathematically it's impossible for it to go through, but I think it's a really sad day. Really sad day.
Yeah. And why is that? You think it's a good deal?
I don't think it's necessarily a good or a bad deal, but it's perhaps better than the no deal.
I just think it's a shame that they're not helping her at all. None of them. They all seem to be against her. So instead of doing all this argument, they'll get their heads together and they'll push it through.
Are you worried then that MPs are trying to block Brexit?
Yes, they are, definitely.
Everything just seems very confused at the moment. It's quite frustrating because really it's only sort of 2 months away that we should be, you know, exiting, and actually nothing's really sort of confirmed.
It's just gone on too long. It's aggravating now. You've got people that want us to come out and people that don't like all the MPs. They're like children. I'm just sick of it all.
We just want it to be over. We would love for them to focus on something other than Brexit, like health, education, welfare, anything basically. And we think they're behaving like complete buffoons. And we really, really dislike the whole of Parliament at the moment.
I was really struck by the visceral frustration that people here in Harlow feel towards politicians. The phrase that kept coming up again and again was that they're behaving like children. There was also more support for Theresa May's deal than I was expecting, not because people think it's brilliant, but because they want it all to be over. That is wishful thinking. 56 people are employed at this Harlow business, making water softeners, filters and calcium treatment units. At European Water Care, they want to be optimistic about Brexit. They're sourcing more material locally and the weak pound has certainly helped exports. But it's uncertainty that's the problem.
I would say generally we've had no help or advice from government.
So no help or advice really at all?
Not really that I can really sort of hang my hat on or plan with. We've had no planning tools, just communiques through .gov.uk to say you should do this, but then again you should do that. Nothing cast iron.
And that must be hard, that uncertainty.
It's really hard as a business leader to plan for that eventuality. You know, I'm responsible for the employment of 56 people. You know, they all have mortgages and normal day-to-day worries.
So what have you stockpiled and how long have you given yourself?
We've stockpiled raw materials as a manufacturer to take us over a kind of a 3-month period, March, April, May and into June. And That's mainly the stuff that we've got outside of the UK, so that our supply lines are not affected inside the UK.
And you voted to leave in the referendum?
I did vote to leave, yes.
So it's not Brexit that's the issue, it's the way the government's handling Brexit then?
Exactly right.
Over coffee in his favourite cafe, the Conservative MP for Harlow, Robert Halfon, explained why he can't support the Prime Minister's deal, at least not yet.
As it currently stands, I'm not going to be supporting the Prime Minister because it keeps us in a spaghetti junction of EU bureaucracy. There's no end date to the backstop. We pay £39 billion of taxpayers' money up front without even a trade deal. at the end, and I think there are significant problems. So I'm not able to support the Prime Minister unless the deal changes substantially by Tuesday.
So there is a little bit of wriggle room, is there, if she pulls something out of the hat from the EU?
Well, if she can show what we're getting for the £39 billion, if there is an end date to the backstop, or at least that Britain has a genuine legal unilateral right to withdraw from this open-ended arrangement, infinite almost arrangement with the EU, then maybe I would support it. But as it currently stands, I think it is just too bureaucratic. It keeps us in all the EU regulations and laws without any voice, without any right of veto, and without any vote, and I just think that is wrong.
So perhaps then, if the deal, as we expect, fails, she goes back to Brussels and comes back with something slightly different, you might back it?
Of course, I don't like voting against the Prime Minister. I know that she's doing her best for the country, and if she came back and there were changes to the deal and she presented them to Parliament, obviously I would look at it and see whether it was possible to support. But as it currently is, I feel that it would break the promise that I made to my constituents the day after the referendum in 2016, and I said that I will do everything to ensure that Brexit means Brexit. And when we vote on these things, it's a big thing. And I've thought about it almost every day for the last few months, what we're doing, what the potential effect will be on our country. That's why I've thought hard about another option, and I've worked very closely with a Labour MP, Lucy Powell, so that we go back to the common market that we originally joined, and it would be called Common Market 2.0, a different way of dealing with Europe, but making sure that Brexit means Brexit at the same time.
The model that you're talking about is sometimes referred to as the Norway option, isn't it? Like staying within a customs union in the single market. There's a big problem with that, isn't it? You'd have to accept free movement of people.
Actually, Common Market 2.0 delivers the referendum result. It takes us out of the EU bureaucracy, very important. It takes us out of the European Court of Justice. It takes back control.
But I asked about immigration.
I'll come on to it. It takes back control of our fish, of our farming, because we'd be out of the CAP and the CFP. And on freedom of movement, the important thing is that if there are any particular economic, environmental, or societal difficulties, you can stop freedom of movement, each individual.
But you have no guarantees that would be allowed.
No, you do. Under the declaration in the EFTA agreement, you can have a break on freedom of movement for particular circumstances, and that's why I'm able to support this deal. So you can stop freedom of movement when it is there are peculiar circumstances to your country. So if we judge that there was a particular economic impact that was very negative, Britain would be able to stop freedom of movement to this country.
And the other issue with it as well is that we have not got very long to sort this out. We're supposed to be leaving the EU in just a couple of months' time. Joining, the common market, if you like it isn't just like opening up a Netflix account, is it? You haven't got any guarantees that this would be accepted.
Well, I don't agree with that, and this is one of the reasons why I wrote this pamphlet with Lucy Powell, a Labour MP, very different constituency in the northwest, Manchester, to mine Harlow in the east of England, because there's a lot of support for it in the House of Commons from MPs from all parties. It's something that people can get behind. Secondly, under the Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement, there is transition, 2 years transition. It is quite possible that in the transition that we could use that to enter the European Free Trade Area, because we're already a member of the EEA.
Well, if you're relying on the transition, surely you need to back the Prime Minister's deal.
Well, the problem with the Prime Minister's deal, for the reasons that I said, is that it gets us into a backstop. It creates two different regimes for Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. This would mean no backstop, no different arrangements. A United Kingdom, it wouldn't weaken the United Kingdom in any way.
You say that there's support among MPs in the House of Commons. One of the big concerns that people have is that there seems to be no majority for anything. So what are the conversations that you've been having that make you think that this actually might have the backing to get through?
Well, we don't know that there's no majority for any options. It hasn't been tested yet, but I've had, since I published this pamphlet with Lucy Powell, we've had a lot of MPs from all parties coming to talk to us, and we had a launch event in the House of Commons wanting to find out more about it. And a lot of people are very sympathetic to this.
Members of the government as well?
Should the Prime Minister this deal not pass through? And yes, some members of the government have actually said, well done. I'm not going to name anyone, but and are very supportive of this. Should the Prime Minister's deal not get through the House of Commons, I think that this Common Market 2.0 is an option that many MPs could rally behind, because it takes back control. It delivers the referendum result, but ensures safeguards jobs, safeguards our economy, and ensures stability for business.
Are you worried that, bearing in mind just how unhappy so many members of the public are with what they're seeing, that the Conservatives are going to be tainted by these Brexit divisions for a long time to come?
If we get it right, I think that will be fine. But if we get it wrong, if there's a recession in our economy, and I think it'll be incredibly damaging for the Conservative Party, yes. And this is why we have to get this right and have to make sure we deliver on the referendum result, because millions of people are expecting us to deliver for 17 million. We have to make sure that our economy is stable and businesses are strong. But if we get this wrong, I think potentially we'll be in big trouble.
Do you think Labour will win the next election?
I think the next election, hopefully, is a long way away, but I think that the Labour Party's, in their domestic issues, are answering a lot of social concerns that people have, and we've got to do the same. Once Brexit is over, the Prime Minister's got to get back to addressing burning injustices in our society, dealing with homelessness, promoting a skills agenda, ensuring that we have affordable housing and much more social housing. Because she's doing a lot of work on the NHS, which should be credited for, but we have to get back on that domestic agenda, because otherwise people will say, you know, what are the Conservative Party for, what are their values, and they'll be listening to Labour Party, not us.
Do you think that the Prime Minister has bought herself the time to do that?
I think if we get Brexit through, there's all to play for. If we get a good deal for the British people, but she must get back on the agenda that she stood on the steps of Downing Street about addressing burning social injustice. There is a huge amount of social injustice in our country. There's a huge amount of people still struggling with the cost of living. There are too many people who are homeless, who are living in poverty, and it has to be our party that's the forefront of this agenda addressing these things.
I mean, some people say it's actually time for a new generation of Conservatives to take over after Brexit.
Well, I'm happy whether it's new generation or old generation. There are plenty of people from all sections of the party, from all wings of the party, who have great ideas about the way that it is, but we've got to get those ideas at the forefront. The government has to have a radical agenda.
And do you think Labour is the one with a radical agenda now, not the Conservatives?
Well, I don't agree with the prescription, but nevertheless, in many cases, they are talking the language of the British people. People are struggling with the cost of living, and they want to know that the Conservatives are on their side, and we've got to prove that.
Okay. Robert Halfon there, and after the break we'll be talking to another Conservative MP, this time with a very different perspective, Anne-Marie Trevelyan. Welcome back. Well, in November, Anne-Marie Trevelyan quit the government over Theresa May's Brexit deal. And in her resignation letter, she raised concerns about the Irish backstop and also the fishing industry. And we're pleased to say that she joins us now. Thank you very much for being with us. So has the Christmas break made you change your mind?
I'm afraid it hasn't, no. There's been no change to the withdrawal agreement documentation or indeed to the political declaration documentation, so my view still stands at the moment. It just isn't something that, as a Brexiteer and someone who believes that we must respect the will of the people through that referendum order that we were given, this doesn't do that.
As someone who's quite plugged into, the Conservative benches, do you have any indication that people are changing their minds?
No, not really. It's been really interesting, actually. We've all, chat over Christmas and, keep trying to get our heads around it. We all of us want to leave on the 29th of March with a deal, or the framework for sorting out the logistics over a transition period, if we possibly can.
So a no deal is not something you'd like to see?
Well, I'd rather not, but I'm also very focused on making sure that preparedness is actually in place. That's been one of the challenges I've been pushing the Prime Minister for a while now, both publicly and privately, to say, are you sure that everything's in place? Because the challenge I get coming back from my constituents, be it the fishing community, as you mentioned, the farming community, small businesses. My constituency has no big Jaguar Land Rover companies. It has lots of small businesses, some of whom trade with the EU. The question is it ready? And they're saying to me, well, we don't know, it's all I know. So no deal's just really scary. But actually, and as some of the civil service articles written recently have shown, the civil service, the best in the world, ours, is preparing. I think the challenge we've got is the Prime Minister has been slow to make sure that businesses know, to try and reduce that fear and anxiety, knowing that, much like the Millennium Bug crisis, you probably weren't, old enough to remember, but I do, the world was going to end, everything was going to stop.
Get you anywhere.
I try. But the reality is that, the civil service is prepared, and all that can be put in place will be, and businesses need to know that. So I think that's a critical part of, once we get through this week's noise and fireworks, to actually make sure that businesses do know what's what if they are having EU relationships now.
At the same time, though, you're somebody who backed Brexit. We just heard from Chris Grayling, the Transport Secretary, who made the point that if you don't back the Prime Minister's deal, then there is a concern among many people who supported leave that Brexit might not happen, or it will be much, much softer than you would like it to be. I mean, is that not something that you're concerned about?
So the reality is that the statute in place at the moment is to leave on the 29th of March, either with an agreed deal, which is what the Prime Minister has been negotiating, or if one can't be reached by then, on a no-deal basis, and then we continue the conversation afterwards. But we will have stepped away from all those EU connections. There's a lot in the withdrawal agreement that's fine. It's like a basket of all the legacy stuff wrapped up in one. So it's much easier if we can do it, in a one big glue. But some of it's just not acceptable because it won't deliver Brexit.
But at the same time, though, if you look at the papers today, there's lots of stories in the Sunday Times, for example, amongst others, about MPs who are absolutely opposed to the idea of a no-deal Brexit, talking about bringing new legislation to stop it happening.
Well, that is a great challenge, and some of the, the activity we've seen this week in Parliament with, trying to so dramatically change how Parliament works that everything becomes completely unstable is indeed, as the Prime Minister herself, into unprecedented and uncharted territory. But that must not stop us from remembering that we gave the people a referendum. Now, it's a fairly blunt tool. I don't think any of us would disagree with that. But having done so, if we don't respect the result that they sent back to us, which is an order, it's not a nice idea for us to now continue to discuss. It was a very clear order. We must make sure that we actually leave the EU, and the withdrawal agreement as it stands will not do that because of the Irish backstop. So that needs to be something that the Prime Minister goes back to the EU and says, I'm afraid, Parliament says this isn't acceptable. This is the area of concern. Please can we fix it? We've got, nearly 3 months to do that. For them to decide. This isn't for the Prime Minister. It's not under her control. I think that's the frustration. It's all being kind of dumped on her head. Actually, the EU have to decide whether they are OK with a no-deal position on the 29th of March, or whether they would rather make some amendments now so that that bulk of the withdrawal agreement, which is absolutely fine, can be put through.
OK. I'm interested to talk to you a little bit about the future of the Conservative Party as well, because it's been a really bruising couple of years for your party. I mean, you've been fighting like cats and dogs there, to be blunt. You've spoken before about worries about young voters being switched off from the Conservatives, and even saying that your own son might not vote for you.
Well, no one ever let me finish that sentence.
Go on then, I'll let you finish it. Are you still worried that he might not vote for you?
Well, I think probably he would. He can now vote. The problem at the time was he was a few days off being able to vote in the 2017 election. The finish of that sentence was because I'm probably not right-wing enough for him.
Oh, interesting.
But of course that wasn't chosen. But it's a really interesting website. There are an extraordinary number of incredibly focused young people interested in politics. I think the challenge they've had is to try to get to grips. They're arriving into politics at this monumental point, and at this point where we're using a tool that is, used very, very rarely, perhaps just as well, the referendum, and trying to understand what it means. So if having used a referendum, which is a direct order rather than normal politics, which is you elect your MP and then you let them, make their judgment, and if you don't like the way they make judgments, you chuck them out the next time round. All parties are on a state of huge flux. The Labour Party is equally, split in the way, it's trying to find how it goes forwards with a very hard left core sitting on the front bench, and all, those who have been, if you like, the wisdom and the experience of the Labour Party for the last 30 years sitting behind them on the backbenches. I think that's in both cases, and maybe it reflects, the fact that this is having a referendum generates huge political energy, and we must make sure that we harness it carefully and that it goes forwards so that our country can do as well as it can.
OK, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Now, if she's going to have any chance of getting her deal through, the Prime Minister needs to win support from right across the political spectrum, from the ERG to union bosses. And one of those that she hopes to convince is the Labour MP John Mann, who joins us now from his constituency in Nottinghamshire. Thank you very much for being with us. So will you back the Prime Minister's deal?
Well, a day's a long time in politics, so things can change. But as it stands, it's likely I'll vote for the deal, yes.
And how many other Labour MPs do you expect to vote with the Prime Minister?
Well, I don't expect, if I do, I don't expect to be the only one. I'd be surprised if it's anything like enough to get this deal through, but things can change. And you need to remember, I voted leaving the referendum, but more importantly, I voted to trigger Article 50. I voted for the referendum in the first place. Every single Labour MP, apart from the honourable exception of Mike Gapes, did so. And my manifesto that I stood on, the Labour manifesto this time, said we're going to see through the will of the people and the referendum decision to leave the European Union. And so the choices are going to get starker, and there are some choices. The general election, which Labour wants, is an option. I will support that option. I'm very happy to have a general election, but I don't see that getting a majority in Parliament. And whether that would resolve things, whether there would be a Labour government with a large enough majority to see things through, is also clearly not known. Labour could be in power because, just like Theresa May, is a minority government. But that's an option. That's an honest option. There's the option of having a referendum. I disagree with that option. We've given the people a vote, and that's not what our manifesto said. That'd be breaking our manifesto, but that's a clear option. And the other option is Anne-Marie Trevelyan's, a so-called no deal. That's a bit of a false option. There's no such thing as no deal. The no deal option actually means thousands of deals into the future with the European Union. I'll give you one example. I'd raised a small matter, the Grand National on the 6th of April. With a no deal, unless we have a deal with the Irish, then no Irish horses will be coming to the Grand National. And if we don't have a permanent deal either with Ireland and the Irish government or the European Union, then British horse racing collapses because there'll be no Irish horses ever here again. There will be, with no deal, thousands of deals with the European Union. If you go on holiday to Spain, then there's a deal that will have to be done over healthcare. There's a deal over repatriating bodies if someone sadly died over in, say, Spain. There's a deal over how you get through customs, a deal whether you can take your dog there or not. I mean, there are thousands of deals. So no deal actually is the wrong term. And I think the mess and chaos and uncertainty that will cause negotiating all those thousands of deals is the worst option, other than putting it off. Because my constituents are saying, get on with it. The worst of anything would be delaying Article 50 for me.
I just want to pick you up on one thing that you said in that answer, which is where that you vote for a general election, you'd be happy for there to be a general election? Because there'll be some people in the Labour movement who'll be looking at what you're perhaps going to be doing, what we expect you to be doing, which is to vote for the Prime Minister's deal, and think that that is the one thing that makes a general election less likely. And they're right, aren't they? They would be right. You're effectively propping up a Conservative government.
It's not propping up a Conservative government. It's trying to get a structure of a deal through. There'll be a confidence vote. There could have been one put already, and when there is, that may trigger a general election. Labour doesn't have the votes to do that, so something's going to have to happen big for that to get through. But that's it's a perfectly honest, legitimate option. I'm happy to have a general election every year if necessary. I'm not sure the public. I polled my voters. General election is the least welcome option. 8% of them. I polled 5,000 responded. 8% in favour of general election. So that's not where they're coming from. But general election is one option. But the Conservatives are not going to vote for a general election. And intriguingly, the reason I'm comfortable with that is, of course, in a general election, Jeremy Corbyn's made clear the Labour Party will be going for Brexit, delivering Brexit in the general election. The intriguing thing is that if there is a confidence vote, some of the Labour MPs who are most ardent about a second referendum at all costs will be voting for a general election where that's not going to be an option for the Labour Party. So that's an intriguing dilemma for them. But we've put an amendment, a group of us, to the government on labour law, environmental protections and health and safety. Major red lines for us. And the union leaders have all commented on that. I believe the Prime Minister even talked to them about it. And they've said the problem with it is it's not legally binding. Well, that's incorrect, because with the Withdrawal Act that has to happen for this all to be seen through, then a legally binding commitment to guaranteeing existing rights on workers' rights, on environmental protection, on health and safety, indeed on things like equality as well, is eminently possible, and there's a majority to do it. I'm hoping that the government says that they will back it and they'll put it in. But even if they didn't, we can put that in. And that, to me, is where this discussion, this debate, if you like, the negotiations, need to take place to commit, to get us through the hurdle that the two main parties said we'll see through Brexit, because that's what the British people voted for. And that's where I think this needs to go next. And there's not much time, but there is enough time. And at some stage, I think that those kind of deals, i.e. agreement of what's got a majority, will hold people together. Because I do think bringing people together in this country is now absolutely vital. The South that generally voted Remain, and the North that generally voted to leave.
And a quick thought from you before we end. You were talking there about trying to get agreement. You went in to see the Prime Minister this week. Did she give you any indication that she was likely to accept any of your requests?
Yes, and specifically understanding that the legislation, not just a promise from the Prime Minister, but the legislation on the Withdrawal Act will need to meet those requirements. And it's not just guaranteeing the existing standards, because our workers' rights, our environmental protections are higher than the European Union. It's also ensuring that they improve theirs, that government will be legally bound to bring those proposals so that the House of Commons Parliament can vote on them. And this is vital stuff. And don't forget, Sophie, there is the possibility that there could be at some stage, perhaps immediately or in the next couple of years, a minority Labour government in the same position as Theresa May. Now, is that minority Labour government, even a majority Labour government with a small majority, spending its entire time trying to construct Brexit, or has it got those guarantees legally in place? In my view, it's vital to do so, that we have, leaving the European Union, a country that competes on the highest standards, not the lowest standards, in terms of pay and conditions. That's the kind of Brexit I want to see. That's the real choice. Do we have a race to the bottom and try and undercut everyone else in the European Union on pay and conditions? Or do we have a race to the top and we do it based on the highest conditions, the highest standards, being the best in the world? That's the opportunity that Parliament's got, and I want to see the government continue in the next 48 hours to be responsive to specific demands. One of my colleagues I know is in discussions with them, with others, over the whole issue of equality law. Let's have the highest standards, but let's have it legally binding in the Withdrawal Act, and let's have that guarantee before Tuesday. That will move us on. Will it get the Prime Minister over the line? I suspect not, but it takes us a lot nearer towards that.
OK, John Mann, thank you very much. Thank you. Well, coming up after the break, we'll be talking to the Shadow Business Secretary, Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Hi, I'm Hannah Stott with the latest showbiz news. A warning, some flash photography is coming up. Lady Gaga has vowed to remove a duet she recorded with R. Kelly from streaming services and never collaborate with him again. Her comments on Twitter followed a new television documentary in which multiple women accuse Kelly of sexual misconduct, sometimes with minors. The Chicago-born singer and record producer has repeatedly denied accusations in recent years of abuse, including those made in the new documentary.
Back projection, cue music, and action! Hollywood legends Mr. Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy arrived in Britain today as they embarked on a national tour.
We're doing this while we're waiting for this new picture to come together.
In 1953, comedy movie legends Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy embarked on a stage tour of the UK and Europe. The actors' movie-making career had come to an end and their star power was beginning to wane. The duo nonetheless hit the road for a tour that ultimately proved to be their swan song. This relatively unknown chapter of the stars' lives is explored in new movie Stan and Ollie, which stars Steve Coogan as Laurel and John C. Reilly as Hardy.
My contract's up and yours isn't, that I won't be able to go anyplace else and I'll have to take what he's offering. Wait. What's a parvenu? Well, it's someone who started out with nothing, got rich, but has no class. Look it up in the dictionary, Hal. There's a picture of you.
Oh, it's funny because we almost use that love that people have for them for their actual work to lure them into the story that's actually not about their actual work. This is the story of their relationship and what it was like to be with each other and what it was like to work together. So we used the love that existed out there for them for their act to lure people into to see what it might feel like to be in the act.
I mean, the short answer is it was intimidating, but ultimately irresistible, I think. Given that we had all the support around us to make it happen.
Welcome back. Now, we've been focusing a lot on the government's plan this morning, but what about Labour's? Let's try and get to the bottom of it. We're joined from Salford by the Shadow Business Secretary, Rebecca Long-Bailey. Thank you for being with us. So 2 days until the Prime Minister puts her plan to Parliament. Labour have said that you want to vote against it. So let's get specific now, because this is really important. What would Theresa May have to do? What assurances would she have to get from Brussels for Labour to support her Brexit deal?
Well, I don't think assurances are enough. We've been stating from, the outset what Labour would like to see from a deal. We're nowhere near that, unfortunately, and unfortunately we're nowhere near anybody else's red lines across Parliament, because we don't think that Theresa May will have a majority on Tuesday, even from her own backbenchers, let alone the Labour Party. But we do think that a deal can be found within Parliament that would be able to provide a consensus, not just within Parliament but across Britain. But the government's had 2 years to deliver on that, and they've found themselves to be incapable of doing that, which is why we're pushing quite strongly, in the event of Theresa May's deal falling, that a general election should be called.
But what I'm just struggling to work out is what would need to change for Labour to accept the deal? What is it that you want?
Well, there's a number of issues. The customs union backstop is a key issue. We've been arguing for a permanent customs union deal with the right for Britain to have a say in future trade deals. What we have on the table is nowhere near that. It provides for a customs arrangement for Britain. It's a completely different arrangement for Northern Ireland, and doesn't provide any certainty whatsoever about what our future customs arrangements are going to be, let alone what our overall agreement with the EU is going to be. The political declaration itself is extremely ambiguous. It's deficient in a number of areas: workers' rights, security, our future trading relationship. And I'm afraid after 2 years that simply isn't good enough. We've been stating that we want a deal that provides us with a strong single market relationship. We want to have strong collaboration with the EU, and we want a floor under existing rights and protections. But not just that, we expect the UK government to keep up with improvements in labour law, with health and safety and environmental rights.
We've been hearing for months on the show that Labour want a general election. That's a policy that seems absolutely crystal clear. So when are you going to call a confidence motion in the government? Will it be this week if Theresa May loses that vote?
Well, we've always said it's a case of when, not if, and Jeremy's judging the situation day by day. We'll wait and see what happens on Tuesday, and we'll act, at the appropriate time.
But no clarity on when that's going to be. It just seems extraordinary that you're so desperate for an election and yet you can't give any clarity on when you're likely to call for one.
Well, of course, the odds of us tabling a vote of no confidence increase dramatically in the event that Theresa May's deal falls. But ultimately, the decision rests with Jeremy, and it's up to him to determine when we do, put forward that vote of no confidence. But it's certainly a case of when, not if.
OK, above your pay grade on the actual date of when it's called, I understand. Now, in the election that Labour are so keen to get, I'm just trying to work out, would you campaign for Brexit or against Brexit?
Well, our current manifesto states that we respect the result of the referendum and we want a deal that puts our economy first. Now, ultimately, of course, when we go through the next manifesto-making process, we have those discussions within the Labour Party, but that is our position. At conference, we agreed a wide-ranging policy that stated that we wanted to have a general election in the event that Theresa May's deal fell, and that was to avoid a no-deal impasse, but also to ensure that we could put forward our deal that would provide a consensus across Parliament. But in the event that all of that failed, we wanted to keep all options on the table because it's critical to avoid a no-deal situation.
OK, so just trying to kind of unpick your answer there, it sounds like you would be campaigning for Brexit, but a different kind of deal negotiated. Now, just trying to kind of really get some clarity on what Labour wants to do. Last week on the show, Barry Gardner suggested that actually what would happen is that Labour would have an election, they'd then renegotiate a deal, and then put that negotiated deal back to the British people in a referendum. Is that party policy?
That's not official party policy at this stage. I mean, the policy that we agreed at conference was to call a general election, try to secure the best deal that we possibly can, and in the event that that's not possible or there are any other issues, we had all options on the table. And the specifics of the policy that would go into our manifesto, we're a democratic party, that would be discussed at the appropriate time when we were putting together the manifesto. But, to be as clear as I possibly can, we've always said that we respected the result of the referendum. We've always said that we wanted to secure a good deal for Britain. But in the event that that seems impossible or a no-deal situation seems to be hurtling towards us, we've been very clear within the party that all options will remain on the table. But our priority has always been making sure that we get that deal.
OK. Now, this week we saw some pretty horrific images, really, of MPs being surrounded by protesters, being labelled Nazis, being shouted at. Anna Soubry, the Conservative MP, has given an interview in the last week where she says that she won't even stand close to the edge of the platform on the London Underground because she's worried about people pushing her into the path of a train. Is it frightening being an MP at the minute?
Well, I mean, certainly, in light of what happened to my colleague, Jo Cox, a few years ago, I think it's brought home the reality of the risks that are involved to members of political parties, but also other leading public figures. And it's, it's not acceptable to be living under that threat of fear. But equally, you expect to be held to account as a politician. You expect your constituents to tell you what they feel. You expect to be, held to account for your own actions as well, but not in a way that makes you feel intimidated or frightened.
OK. Rebecca Long-Bailey, thank you very much for being on the programme today.
Thanks very much.
Well, that's it for this week. Next week is going to be a crunch week for Brexit and for the Prime Minister, as long as she doesn't delay the vote again, but I'm sure she won't. Don't do that to us, please. Sky News will be across every twist and turn, and we, of course, will be back next Sunday, so we hope to see you then.
This is Sky News, the headlines. With 2 days to go before the meaningful vote, Theresa May warns MPs of the dangers ahead if they don't support her Brexit plan. With defeat looking likely, the government steps up preparations for no deal, with military planners being deployed to prevent chaos at the border. Also ahead, we meet some of the thousands who fled violence in South Sudan and can't go home because of a failed ceasefire.
The peace is in name only so far, and the tens of thousands of civilians who've been displaced by this ongoing war are not prepared to leave these camps or give up the protection of the UN peacekeepers who are ensuring their safety.
DNA pioneer James Watson is stripped of honorary titles over his controversial views on intelligence and race. I'm running. Julian Castro, one of President Obama's cabinet members, takes on Donald Trump in the 2020 election.
Life can be bigger than darkness, and that truth can be bigger than lies. And as long as we work for it, tomorrow will always be better than today. So let's go work. Vámonos!
Plus, read all about it, why independent bookshops are enjoying a resurgence. Hello, a very good morning. Theresa May has warned MPs that they'd be guilty of an unforgivable breach of trust if they vote down her deal and fail to deliver Brexit. Her words come just 2 days before the Commons vote on her agreement with the EU, which seems to be heading for defeat. Well, she says when you turned out to vote in the referendum, you did so because you wanted your voice to be heard. Some of you put your trust in the political process for the first time in decades. We cannot and must not let you down. Doing so would be a catastrophic and unforgivable breach of trust in our democracy. So, my message to Parliament this weekend is simple. It is time to forget the games and do what is right for our country. Well, let's go straight to our political reporter, Rob Powell in Westminster. So, Rob, very strong words from the Prime Minister, but are any MPs listening?
Well, I think it's unlikely that she'll get enough MPs to change their mind